"You're coming with me." That's what the mountain man growled when he saw her on the ground, beaten for giving birth to twin girls. The badge had the crowd on his side. But the man from the high country had something stronger: iron hands, a paper in his coat, and no fear of standing alone. A baby's cry pierces the silence. Hooves thundered past the shuttered general store. What no one knew was that those babies were born to inherit more than a mother's love. There's a spring in these hills worth more than gold, and men in fine coats will burn homes and break vows to get it. A promise was made, written, witnessed, and buried with the man she loved. Now it's the only thing keeping her family together. Door slams. Snow scatters. The church bell tolls again. When the law turns against her and the town takes sides, who will keep her safe? And who will take everything she has left? Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. The bitter wind whistled through Penance's main street as townspeople huddled in doorways and along the wooden sidewalks. Deputy Wade Culver's boots kicked up dust as he dragged Lena Bluebird Navarez forward by her arm. Her dark hair fell across her face, but she kept her twins clutched tight against her chest, their thin blankets offering little protection from the cold. "Look here." Culver's voice rang out harsh and sharp. "This here's what happens when savages mix with decent folk." He yanked harder on Lena's arm, making her stumble. The twins began to cry, their tiny wails piercing the evening air. Lena tried to turn away, shielding her babies with her body. "Please," she whispered, "they're just innocent children." "Innocent?" Culver sneered, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight. "Nothing innocent about half-breeds. You're Apache blood, and that Mexican husband of yours. My Mateo was a good man," Lena said softly, but with steel in her voice. "These are his daughters." Culver's face twisted with rage. He raised his hand, ready to strike. "I'll teach you to talk back." A massive shadow detached itself from between the buildings. A hand like an iron bar caught Culver's wrist mid-swing. Jonah Braddock stood there, his buckskin jacket dusted with trail dirt, his face hard as granite. Under his broad-brimmed hat, "You're coming with me," Jonah growled, his quiet words carrying more threat than any shout. Culver tried to jerk free, but Jonah's grip didn't budge. The deputy's other hand twitched toward his gun, but one look at Jonah's eyes made him think better of it. The mountain man stood head and shoulders above him. Years of working freight wagons through the Rockies carved into every line of his body. Without another word, Jonah released Culver's wrist and turned to Lena. His movements became gentle as he guided her toward his waiting wagon. "Ma'am," he said softly, helping her up onto the seat. The twins had quieted, as if sensing safety in this stranger's presence. The gathered crowd muttered among themselves as Jonah climbed up beside Lena and took the reins. A few faces showed sympathy, others fear, but none dared speak out as the wagon rolled away from town. Snow began to fall as they reached Jonah's line shack, the flakes catching silver in the gathering dusk. The small cabin sat tucked against a stand of pine trees, rough-hewn but solid. Jonah helped Lena down, then quickly led her inside where a banked fire waited in the stone hearth. "Let me get that going proper," he said, adding kindling and logs, until warmth began to spread through the one-room shelter. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, highlighting the simple furnishings: a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a chest against the wall. Lena sat in one of the chairs, still holding her daughters close. Her face showed exhaustion, but her eyes remained alert, watching Jonah's every move. "You must be hungry," he said, moving to the small counter where he kept supplies. He pulled out bread, dried meat, and a jar of preserved peaches. "It ain't much, but it's filling." "Thank you," Lena said softly. accepting the food with one hand while keeping the twins balanced in her lap. For everything, Jonah just nodded, busying himself with making sure the shutters were secured against the growing storm. When he finished, he gestured toward the bed. "You take that tonight. I'll make do on the floor." "I couldn't." "You can. And you will," he said firmly but kindly. "Those little ones need their mama rested." While Lena settled the twins and herself on the bed, Jonah moved quietly around the cabin, laying out his bedroll near the hearth. Then he went to the chest and opened it, removing a folded paper that he placed on the table without comment. In the firelight, the official seal was visible on the document, his guardianship bond, giving him legal authority to offer protection to those in need. He'd taken it out years ago, after his wife died, thinking maybe helping others might ease the hole in his heart. He'd never used it before tonight. Lena's eyes fell on the paper, understanding dawning in her expression. She didn't speak, but some of the tension left her shoulders as she tucked her sleeping daughters more securely under the warm quilt. The snow fell harder outside, but inside the cabin, the fire crackled steadily. Jonah lay down on his bedroll, his back to the flames. "Rest easy," he said quietly. "You're safe here." The night settled around them, broken only by the soft breathing of the twins and the whisper of wind in the pines. For the first time since Culver had grabbed her in town, Lena allowed herself to close her eyes, knowing that for this moment at least, she and her daughters had found shelter from more than just the storm. On the table, the guardianship bond lay like a promise in the fading firelight, its presence a silent pledge that tomorrow would bring a new beginning for all of them. Morning light crept through the frost-etched windows of Jonah's lime shack. Lena stirred on the narrow bed, her twins nestled close against her. The rich aroma of coffee filled the small space, and she could hear Jonah moving quietly by the hearth, trying not to wake them. A soft knock at the door made her sit up, alert and wary. Jonah's large frame blocked the entrance as he opened it. Then his shoulders relaxed. "Morning, Atsa," he said, stepping back to let someone enter. An older woman stepped inside, her silver-streaked hair bound in traditional Ute style. She carried a cloth-covered basket and a small clay jug. Her dark eyes were kind, but shrewd as they took in the scene. "I am Atsa Whitefeather," she said to Lena, moving toward the bed with quiet dignity. "I heard there were little ones needing attention." She set down her supplies and smiled. "I brought goat's milk and fresh swaddling cloths." Lena's tension eased slightly at the woman's gentle manner. "Thank you. I'm Lena Nivarez." Atsa nodded, already unwrapping her basket. "May I?" She gestured to the twins. At Lena's nod, she carefully examined each baby, her experienced hands gentle but thorough. "This one," she indicated the smaller twin. "She is tiny but has a warrior's spirit. I can feel it in her grip." The baby had wrapped her tiny fingers around Atsa's thumb. "Both are healthy, though they could use more warmth." Jonah brought over 3 tin cups of coffee, setting them on the small table. "Atsa's the best midwife in 3 territories," he said. "They've been delivering babies longer than most folks around here been alive. 52 years, Atsa corrected with a slight smile. "Though some days it feels like 100. She helped Lena sit up against the headboard, then showed her how to feed the twins using the goat's milk and a soft cloth. While they ate a simple breakfast of cornbread and dried fruit, Jonah cleared his throat. He reached for the paper he'd left on the table the night before. "Miss Nivarez, there's something you should know." He unfolded the document carefully. "This here's a guardianship bond. Gives me legal right to protect folks who've been wronged until they can get proper justice before a judge." Lena's hands trembled slightly as she took the paper, reading it slowly. "You mean Deputy Culver can't take my babies?" "Not while you're under my protection," Jonah confirmed. "It's all legal and proper." Atsa nodded approvingly. "Good. The Law must work both ways, not just for those with power. The morning passed quietly. Atsa showed Lena how to wrap the twins in the new swaddling cloths, singing soft Ute lullabies as she worked. Around noon, another knock came at the door. This time, it was Reverend Thomas Avery, his collar marking him as a man of the cloth. He carried blankets and a covered basket. "I thought you might need these," he said softly, not quite meeting Lena's eyes. He set everything down quickly, as if eager to leave. But at the door, he paused, glancing back at Lena with genuine kindness in his expression before slipping away. "That man carries a burden," Atsa observed, watching him go. "Perhaps someday he will find the courage to speak of it." The day grew colder as evening approached. Wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, making the lamp flames dance. Atsa had left after teaching Lena a few more tricks for caring for the twins, promising to return tomorrow just before darkness fell completely. The sound of an approaching wagon made everyone freeze. Jonah moved to the window, his expression hardening. "Culver," he said grimly, "and Silas Merriweather with him." Lena clutched her babies closer. "The railroad man?" Jonah nodded, opening the door as two men approached. Deputy Culver's badge gleamed dully in the fading light, his hand resting near his gun. Beside him, Silas P. Merriweather cut an elegant figure in his Eastern-cut suit, seemingly unbothered by the cold. "Evening, Braddock," Merriweather said smoothly, removing his hat. "May we come in? We have some legal matters to discuss." Jonah blocked the doorway. "Say your piece from there." Merriweather's smile didn't waver as he pulled out a sheaf of papers. It seems the late Mateo Navarez held deed to a rather valuable piece of property, Bluebird Spring. As his widow, Mrs. Navarez here would normally inherit. His tone turned regretful. "However, given certain circumstances, we have concerns about her fitness to manage such an important water source." "What circumstances?" Jonah's voice was dangerously quiet. Culver stepped forward. "Woman of mixed blood. No proper marriage record we can find. Suspicious. Death of her husband, and now living unchaperoned with a man." He sneered. "Ain't fitting to raise them girls, much less control water rights the railroad needs." "We're prepared to be generous," Merriweather added. "The railroad will compensate her for the spring, and we can arrange proper care for the children." "Get off my property." Jonah's words cut through the wind like a knife. "Now see here," Culver started, but Jonah's hand moved to the rifle by the door. "I have legal guardianship papers," he said evenly. "Neither Lena nor her daughters are going anywhere, and any claim on Bluebird Spring will have to be proven in court." Merriweather's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, showing something cold beneath. "As you wish. We'll do this officially then." He placed the papers back in his coat. "Good evening, Mr. Braddock, Mrs. Navarez." They turned back toward their wagon, Culver throwing one last dark look over his shoulder. Inside the cabin, Lena's voice shook slightly. "Bluebird Spring. It was Mateo's dream. He said it would give our daughters a future." She looked up at Jonah. "They'll try to take everything, won't they?" Jonah secured the door, checking that the rifles were loaded before answering. "They'll try," he agreed. "But they don't know what they're up against yet." Jonah stood in the doorway long after the wagon's sound faded, his shoulders stiff with tension. The evening wind carried of winter, and inside the twins' soft whimpers broke the silence. "Mr. Braddock?" Lena's voice was steady despite her fear. "What exactly did those papers say?" He turned from the door, his expression grim. "Merriweather claims the railroad needs Bluebird Spring for a watering station. Says it's vital for the new line they're planning." He moved to stoke the fire, adding another log. "But that ain't the whole truth of it." "What do you mean?" "If they can prove you're—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Unfit to raise your girls, the county takes custody. Then whoever's." Appointed guardian of the children gets to manage the spring in trust until they come of age. And they'd sign it over to the railroad, Lena finished, her voice bitter. She cradled one fussing twin closer while the other slept in a basket nearby. That's their plan. Jonah reached for the iron pot hanging near the hearth. But we ain't letting that happen. First thing tomorrow, we ride into town. There's folks who'll help if we ask right. He began preparing a simple stew, the familiar task helping him think. You must be hungry. As they ate later by lamplight, Lena spoke softly about Mateo. He was scouting for the army when it happened. Captain Morris said it was a fall from his horse in bad terrain, but ... She stirred her stew absently. Mateo was the best rider I knew. The spring was your dream together? Yes. Mateo said it would be perfect for a homestead. Good water, sheltered valley, enough grazing for a small herd. Her eyes grew distant. He wanted our children to have something of their own, something no one could take away. She looked down at her sleeping daughters. I never thought I'd have to fight for it alone. You ain't alone, Jonah said quietly after supper. While Lena settled the twins for the night, Jonah stepped outside. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked the perimeter of his property, rifle ready. The moon cast long shadows through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. His mind worked through the people in town who might stand with them. That's a white feather for certain. Maybe old Doc Wilson, who'd never much liked the railroad's way of doing things. And Reverend Avery. Something about the preacher's manner today suggested he knew more than he was saying. Dawn brought steel gray skies threatening more snow. Jonah hitched up his team while Lena bundled the twins extra warm. The wagon's boards creaked as they set out for penance. The early morning air sharp in their lungs. The town was just stirring when they arrived. A few early risers watched from doorways as Jonah helped Lena down from the wagon, but no one approached. He led them to the small Methodist church where Reverend Avery lived in the attached cottage. The young preacher answered their knock quickly, as if he'd been expecting them. Come in, he said, ushering them into his modest sitting room. A fire already burned in the grate, and the smell of coffee filled the air. I've been praying about this situation. Reverend, Jonah said, once they were seated, we need the truth, all of it. Avery's shoulders slumped. He looked at Lena, guilt clear in his eyes. I married you and Mateo, he admitted, 2 years ago, just before Easter. It was my first month here, and He trailed off, twisting his hands. I wanted to do what was right in God's eyes. But after, when I heard how some folks talked about mixed marriages, I got scared. I hid the record book to protect myself. Shame colored his voice, and now I can't find it. Lena sat very still, one hand pressed to her mouth. Jonah leaned forward. What do you mean? You can't find it? I moved it from the church records, Avery explained miserably. Put it somewhere safe, I thought, but I've looked everywhere. The book's just ... gone. Without that record, Lena whispered, they'll say I was never really married. That my babies are ... She couldn't finish. 2 weeks, Jonah said, his voice hard. That's how long until the hearing. Time enough to find that book, if we work together. He fixed Avery with a stern look. You're going to help us search every inch of this church, your house, anywhere you might have put it. The Reverend nodded quickly. Of course. I want to make this right. He glanced at the window, where snow had begun to fall again. We should start now, before anyone comes. For morning prayers. As they stood to begin their search, Lena touched Avery's arm. Thank you for telling us the truth, Reverend. Even if we don't find the book ... Thank you. Jonah watched the young preacher straighten slightly at her words, some of his fear falling away. Maybe he thought there was hope yet. But as the snow fell heavier outside, He couldn't shake the feeling that finding one missing book in 2 weeks, time might be the least of their troubles. The day ended with dusty hands and discouraged hearts. They had searched the church office thoroughly, but found no trace of the marriage record. Yet they had a plan now: methodically search every possible hiding place, while discreetly asking trusted townspeople if they remembered the spring wedding. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows as Jonah and Lena sat at Atsa Whitefeather's kitchen table. Steam rose from clay cups of pine needle tea, and the scent of dried herbs hung in the air. The twins slept peacefully in a cradleboard Atsa had brought out, its beadwork catching the early sun. "The circuit singer," Atsa said thoughtfully, her weathered hands wrapped around her cup. "Sarah Blackwood. She used to carry the traveling hymnal where visiting preachers would record their services." She looked at Lena with knowing eyes. "Including marriages?" Jonah leaned forward. "Where might we find her?" "She winters with our people," Atsa replied, gesturing toward the mountains. Several camps spread through the valleys. The snow makes travel difficult, but not impossible for those who know the ways. Reverend Avery, perched nervously on a wooden stool, nodded eagerly. "Yes, I remember now. Sarah was here that spring. She held the book while I performed the ceremony." His face brightened with hope. "If she's still carrying that hymnal ... Then we have proof," Lena whispered, her fingers tight around her cup. Atsa rose and moved to a wooden chest, removing a carefully folded deerskin map. She spread it on the table, pointing to marked locations. "Here and here. These camps welcome." My cousin will know which one she chose this year." As they studied the map, a knock at the door made them all freeze. Atsa answered it calmly, revealing Mrs. Peterson from the general store. The older woman glanced around nervously before speaking in hushed tones. "Thought you should know. Meriwether's hosting a fancy supper tonight at the hotel, inviting all the business owners." She twisted her apron. "He's promising railroad jobs, talking about progress and prosperity, if only that spring gets condemned." "Proper like." Jonah's jaw tightened. "Much obliged for the warning, ma'am." After Mrs. Peterson left, they spent another hour planning their search for Sarah Blackwood. Finally, with careful directions from Atsa, they loaded the wagon for the drive back to the line shack. Evening settled early, bringing more snow. Inside the warm shack, Lena worked at the stove, heating milk for the twins while Jonah sat near the fire, mending a broken stirrup with practiced hands. The leather was old but still good, needing only new stitching to hold it firm. "Reckon we can start searching those camps tomorrow," he said, testing the strength of his repair. "Weather permitting." Lena tested the milk's temperature on her wrist. What if Sarah Blackwood moved on, or lost the hymnal? "Then we keep looking." Jonah set aside the stirrup. "There's always another way, if you're willing to search hard enough." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the fire's crackle and the soft sounds of the twins feeding. Outside, snow piled deeper against the windows, and wind whistled through the pine trees. Meanwhile, in penance, lamplight spilled from the hotel's dining room windows. Inside, Meriwether presided over a long table laden with roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, luxuries that drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled merchants and ranchers. "Gentlemen," Meriwether raised his wine glass, "imagine penance as a true railroad town. Regular trains bringing customers to your shops, carrying your cattle to market." He smiled smoothly. "All we need is that spring for our watering station. Once the county condemns it, progress can begin." Down the street, in the sheriff's office, Deputy Culver worked by candlelight. He opened the filing cabinet carefully, removing Jonah's guardianship bond. "Misplaced documents," he muttered with a smirk, tucking the paper into his coat. Shame how things get lost these days. The next morning dawned gray and cold. Jonah was checking the horses when a rider approached. Through the swirling snow, the man wore an official badge, a messenger from the county judge. "Mr. Braddock?" The messenger pulled out a sealed envelope. "Notice for you and the widow Navarez. Judge Parker's combining the custody and condemnation hearings. 2 weeks from today, 10 o'clock sharp." Jonah took the envelope, his expression grim. Inside, he found Lena already up, feeding the twins. She looked up as he entered, reading his face. "Bad news? They're doing both hearings together now." He handed her the notice. 2 weeks. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she read. "They're not even pretending anymore, are they? This is all about taking the spring. And using your girls to do it." Jonah's voice was hard. "But they don't know about Sarah Blackwood yet, or the hymnal." He reached for his coat. "I'll hitch up the wagon. We need to see Atsa again, start our search today. In this snow? Especially in this snow." He paused at the door. "While folks like Meriwether stay warm in town, playing their paper games. Out here, in weather like this is where we'll find our answers." Lena nodded, understanding. She began bundling the twins, preparing for the journey ahead. The snow was still falling, but somewhere in those white-covered mountains, they had hope. A book, a witness, a chance to prove what was right. They just had to find it in time. Through the window, they could see the snow settling thick on the land, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and challenging. But they were frontier folk, both of them. They knew that sometimes the hardest paths led to the truest. Destinations. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Jonah hitched the team to his wagon. Frost sparkled on the harness leather, and his breath clouded in the crisp morning air. It wrapped extra blankets around straw-filled crates, creating sheltered nests for the twins. Lena tucked hot stones wrapped in flannel near their feet, ensuring the little ones would stay warm during the journey. Atsa arrived on her sturdy pony, wearing a thick wool coat adorned with traditional Ute beadwork. She carried a bundle of dried meat and corn cakes for the trail. "The path will be challenging," she said, studying the snow-covered landscape. "But my people will welcome us when we arrive." They set out as the sun cleared the mountain peaks. Jonah handled the reins with careful attention, choosing the safest route through deepening snow. The wagon wheels creaked and sometimes struggled, but the team was strong and sure-footed. Lena sat beside him, dividing her attention between the sleeping twins and the spectacular winter scenery. "The land looks different in snow," she murmured, watching as a red-tailed hawk circled overhead. "Like everything familiar has been made new." Atsa rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks half hidden by white drifts. They passed through narrow valleys where wind-carved snow created graceful sculptures, and across open meadows where their tracks were the only marks on the pristine surface. By late afternoon, with the temperature dropping, they found a sheltered hollow beside a frozen creek. Jonah unhitched the horses, while Lena and Atsa gathered dry wood from beneath snow-laden pine boughs. Soon, a cheerful fire pushed back the gathering darkness. The twins woke hungry but content, their small faces glowing in the firelight as Lena fed them. Atsa hummed softly, ancient melodies that seemed to rise with the smoke toward the star-filled sky. The sound wrapped around them like a warm blanket, speaking of generations of mothers, of survival, of hope. "My grandmother sang these songs," Atsa said during a pause, "and her grandmother before her. They tell of winter journeys, of finding the way home through storms." She smiled at Lena. "Of keeping faith when the path seems uncertain." Jonah took the night watch, feeding the fire and checking the horses. The cold deepened, but the flames held it at bay. He thought of his own journey, from lonely trapper to freight hauler, and now to protector of this small family. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and bright, until false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. They broke camp early, sharing hot coffee and corn cakes before loading the wagon. The second day's travel proved easier as they followed a well-used winter trail. By mid-morning, smoke from cooking fires marked their destination. A Ute winter camp nestled in a protected valley. Children spotted them first, running to spread the news. By the time they reached the camp's edge, a small welcoming party had gathered. Atsa spoke in a native tongue, introducing Lena and explaining their quest. Nods of understanding passed through the group, and they were led to a large lodge at the camp's center. Inside, warmth from a central fire made the twins coo contentedly. Elders gathered, passing a pipe and listening as Atsa explained their search for Sarah Blackwood and the hymnal. An old woman spoke up, regret in her voice. "The singer was here," she said in careful English, "but left before the heavy snows. Her book... She shook her head. The cover was burned for kindling when fuel ran low. The pages scattered in wind." Lena's shoulders slumped, but Atsa held up her hand. "Wait," she said. "There may be another way." She spoke rapidly in Ute, and several people nodded. A young man hurried from the lodge. He returned carrying something wrapped in soft hide. A wide belt made of intricate beadwork and knotted leather strips. As it was carefully unrolled, Atsa's eyes lit with recognition. "This was made by Mateo," she said softly. "See here. The pattern speaks of his vows to you, Lena. The shell's mark, the date of your joining, and here." She pointed to a section where white and blue beads formed a distinct pattern. "This tells of the hope for twins. It is a marriage record in our way, as binding as any paper." Lena touched the beadwork with trembling fingers. "I remember him working on this. He said he was recording our story the way his grandmother taught him." Jonah studied the belt carefully. "Will it help in court? Against Meriwether's papers?" "It is truth," Atsa said firmly. "Perhaps not in their law, but in a deeper law. And truth has its own power." She carefully rewrapped the belt. "We will bring it to show the judge. Let him see that marriage and family are marked in many ways, all sacred." The camp shared their evening meal with the travelers, tender venison stew and fresh-baked bread. The twins were passed carefully from grandmother to grandmother, each one blessing them in the old way. As darkness fell, Jonah watched Lena relax among these people who honored her marriage and welcomed her children. "We should head back at first light," he said quietly. "That belt might not be legal proof, but it's something real. Something true." He met Lena's eyes. "I promise you, we'll find a way to make them see that truth." In the lodge's warm shadows, the beaded belt lay carefully wrapped, its story waiting to be told. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and steady, while inside the circle of firelight, hope had found new fuel to burn. The journey back to Penance proved more challenging than their outbound trek. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing bitter winds that whipped snow into stinging clouds. Jonah kept the team steady while Lena huddled close, sheltering the twins beneath her shawl. Atsa had remained with her people, but not before sharing wisdom about presenting their case. "We'll need to stop early," Jonah called over the rising wind. "Can't risk the little ones in this weather." He guided the wagon toward a stand of thick pines, where the branches would break the worst of the gale. They spent that night and most of the next day waiting out the storm, precious time ticking away. Lena kept the twins warm, singing soft lullabies while Jonah tended the horses and maintained a small fire despite the gusts. When they finally resumed their journey, the going was slow through fresh-blown drifts. It was late afternoon of the second day when they finally approached Jonah's line shack. Through the swirling snow, they spotted a horse tethered outside, steam rising from its flanks. "Someone's waiting," Jonah said quietly, reaching for his rifle. As they drew closer, A figure emerged from beside the door. A man in a worn cavalry coat, his bearing military despite obvious exhaustion. He raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. "Corporal Eli Hanks," he called out. "I mean, no harm. I've been searching for Mrs. Navarez." Lena stiffened at the name, recognition crossing her face. "He served with Mateo," she whispered to Jonah. Jonah kept his rifle ready but nodded for the man to speak. Hanks stepped forward, his features drawn with what looked like more than physical weariness. "Ma'am," he said to Lena, removing his hat, "I've come a long way to make something right." His voice cracked slightly. "I was there when Mateo ... when we lost him. Been carrying this guilt ever since." Lena handed the sleeping twins to Jonah and climbed down from the wagon. "Come inside," she said softly. "You look half frozen." Soon they were gathered around the stove, steam rising from cups of strong coffee. The twins slept peacefully in their makeshift cradle, while Hanks pulled a leather document wallet from inside his coat. "I was witness to your marriage," he said, looking at Lena. "Mateo talked about you every day of that scout mission. About the spring, about the home you'd built." He swallowed hard. "The night before it happened, he called me to his tent, had me witness this." With trembling fingers, he withdrew a carefully folded paper. "It's his field affidavit. Legal and proper, signed by his commanding officer, too. Granting Bluebird Spring to you, Lena, and ... double quotes." He smiled faintly. "To your future children." He knew somehow. Talked about twins running through the grass someday. Lena took the document with reverence, tears spilling down her cheeks as she recognized Mateo's bold signature. Jonah read over her shoulder, his expression brightening. "This is exactly what we needed," he said. "A legal transfer of property, properly witnessed. Even Merriweather can't argue with Army documentation." Hanks nodded. "When I heard what was happening, I rode 3 days straight from Fort Laramie. I couldn't let them steal what Mateo died protecting." He looked down at his coffee. "I should have brought this sooner. Should have checked on you. Right after ... I'm sorry, Mrs. Navarez. I was a coward." "You're here now," Lena said gently. "That's what matters." Over the next few days, as news of the affidavit spread quietly through town, something shifted in penance. Mrs. Anderson from the Mercantile sent her boy over with fresh bread and preserves. Old Tom Weber, who never spoke to anyone, showed up with his tools and spent an afternoon fixing the shack's loose boards and drafty windows. Widow Chun, who ran the laundry, arrived with a basket of carefully mended baby clothes and extra goats' milk. "For the little ones," she said simply, smiling at the twins before hurrying away. The twins thrived with the extra care, their cheeks growing rounder, their grips stronger. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the now tight windows, one of them made a funny face while feeding. Lena laughed, a real laugh, bright and unexpected. The sound seemed to fill the small shack with warmth. Jonah, working at his small table mending tack, looked up at the sound. Something in his chest tightened at the sight of Lena's smile, at the way the sun caught the dark waves of her hair. He found himself imagining summer evenings, the twins taking their first steps in the grass near Bluebird Spring, Lena's garden growing strong in the rich soil. "We could build a proper house," he said quietly, "up on the rise where Mateo planned it. Good view of the valley from there." Lena glanced at him, her smile softening. "With a porch facing east?" Mateo always talked about watching the sunrise. "Deep. Foundation, thick walls. Maybe even glass windows, once the freight lines are running regular." Jonah's hands worked steadily at the leather as he spoke. Room for the girls to grow. "And for visiting friends," Lena added. "Adsa will want to see the twins often. And Reverend Avery ... double quote." She paused. "Do you really think we can win?" Jonah set aside his work and met her eyes. That affidavit's strong medicine. Hanks is willing to testify. Between that and the belt showing Mateo's intention in his own peoples. Wait. Vod. He nodded firmly. We've got truth on our side. Sometimes that's enough. The twins chose that moment to wake, demanding attention with healthy lungs. As Lena tended to them, humming softly, Jonah stepped outside to split more firewood. The air was crisp but warming, hinting at the change of seasons to come. Like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what spring would bring. He thought about the small family inside, about how naturally they'd come to fit within these walls, about how defending them had somehow begun to heal an emptiness he'd carried since losing his Sarah. Not replacing that loss, but growing something new beside it, like fresh grass after winter. The hearing was still days away, but for the first time since this all began, Jonah felt real hope taking root. They had proof of Mateo's wishes. They had allies, and most importantly, they had each other. Sometimes, he reckoned, that was enough to change the course of things. The week unfolded, with cautious hope at Jonah's line shack. Each morning brought a crisp dawn and the sound of hammers as Jonah and Corporal Hanks worked to strengthen the corral. The old posts had rotted at the base, threatening to give way under the weight of spring mud. Reckon we ought to sink these. Deeper, Hank said, wiping sweat despite the cool air. Ground still soft enough to dig. Jonah nodded, measuring the distance between posts with practiced eyes. 4 feet down should hold. Sarah always said to build things like you mean them. To last. His voice caught slightly on his late wife's name. Inside, Lena moved between the twins' cradle and the cook stove, while Atsa showed her how to make a poultice for colic. The older woman's hands moved with gentle certainty, crushing dried herbs into a fine powder. My grandmother taught me this way, Atsa explained, her dark eyes warm with memory. The plants remember how to heal, if we remember how to ask them properly. The twins were growing stronger each day. Their tiny fists would grasp Lena's fingers as she fed them, and their eyes tracked movement with growing awareness. Even the smaller one was filling out, her cheeks gaining the same round softness as her sister's. When evening came, they gathered around the table for a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and dried apple preserves sent by Mrs. Anderson. The lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls as they finished eating. Jonah rose and retrieved something from his chest, a worn leather Bible, its pages soft with age. Sarah's, he said quietly, running his thumb along the spine. Haven't opened it much since since I lost her. He settled back in his chair, the book resting heavy in his hands. Lena watched him with gentle understanding. What happened? She asked softly. Jonah was silent for a long moment, his big hands cradling the Bible like something precious and painful at once. Childbirth. He finally said, Baby came too early. Nothing the midwife could do. Lost them both. He swallowed hard. Couldn't seem to find my faith after that. Kept asking why, but double quotes. He shook his head. I understand the questioning, Lena said, adjusting one of the sleeping twins. When Mateo died, I felt so alone. But even in my darkest hours, God never left me. His presence was like a small flame in the darkness. Not always enough to see by, but enough to know wasn't alone. Jonah looked up, meeting her eyes across the table. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared grief, of survival, of faith tested but not broken. Would you read something? Lena asked. From Sarah's Bible? Jonah opened the book carefully, its pages falling naturally to a well-worn passage. His deep voice filled the small space as he read from Psalms. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. The familiar words seemed to settle into the corners of the room like a blessing. Lena closed her eyes, letting them wash over her. Even Hanks, who had been quietly mending his coat by the fire, bowed his head in respect. When Jonah finished reading, a peaceful silence filled the shack. The twins slept soundly, and the fire crackled low in the stove. Outside, an owl called softly into the gathering night, but other eyes watched from the ridge above the shack. Deputy Culver crouched in the shadows of a juniper, his face twisted with contempt as he observed the scene through the window. The lamplight painted those inside in shades of gold, a picture of domestic peace that made his gut churn with hatred. He watched until the lamp was extinguished, until the only light was the dim glow of banked coals through the stovepipe. Then he melted back into the darkness, his boot heels silent on the frozen ground. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Jonah hitched the wagon early, helping Lena settle the twins in their padded basket. Sunday mornings meant prayers at Reverend Avery's small church, a ritual that had become important to them all. "Mighty fine day for giving thanks," Hanks observed as they set out, frost crunching under the wagon wheels. The church service was simple but heartfelt. Avery's sermon spoke of community and standing together in times of trial. Several townspeople nodded. Greetings to Lena and the twins, though some still turned away. Progress came slowly in penance, but it came. They were just joining in the final hymn when someone burst through the church doors. "Fire!" The shout cut through the music. "Fire up at Braddock's line shack." Jonah was moving before the echo died. Hanks right behind him. They emerged into the morning sun to see smoke rising from the direction of the shack. Thick, black smoke that spoke of more than just a chimney fire. "Get the twins to Atsa's," Jonah called to Lena as he swung onto his horse. Already, other men were mounting up, grabbing buckets and axes, but they were too late. By the time they crested the rise, the line shack was fully engulfed. Flames roared through the roof, consuming the seasoned logs like kindling. The heat drove them back, forcing them to watch helplessly as the home that had sheltered them all burned to ash. In the dirt near the door, half trampled but clear enough, were boot prints. Jonah recognized the distinctive star pattern on the heel, the same as those worn by Deputy Culver. The acrid smell of smoke led them back to the remains of Jonah's line shack. Thin wisps still curled upward into the pale winter sky, disappearing against heavy clouds that promised more snow. The twins started coughing as soon as they approached, the bitter air catching in their tiny lungs. "We need shelter, and quick," Atsa said, wrapping the babies tighter in their blankets. Little Mercy, already the smaller of the two, wheezed with each breath. Jonah's jaw clenched as he surveyed the destruction. Half the roof had collapsed inward, and what remained of the walls were charred black. The heat had been so intense it had melted snow for yards around the building. Everything they'd had inside, clothes, food, medicines, was gone. "My place," Reverend Avery offered immediately. "It's small but warm." They hurried to the Reverend's modest home behind the church. While Atsa settled the twins by the hearth, Lena tried to quiet their increasingly distressed cries. Mercy's cough grew worse, each bout shaking her tiny frame. "She's burning up," Atsa announced, placing a weathered hand on the baby's forehead. Her expression grew grave. "The cold and smoke. We need to break this fever before it settles in her chest." The old healer worked through the afternoon, brewing willow bark tea and applying cool compresses. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the windows. Jonah paced, his heavy boots wearing a path in the Reverend's floor down near sunset. A knock at the door brought unwelcome news. The judge's clerk stood stamping his feet in the cold, an official notice in his gloved hand. "Mr. Merriweather has petitioned for an emergency hearing," the clerk announced, handing the paper to Jonah. "Given the circumstances, the judge agrees. Court convenes in 3 days." Jonah crushed the notice in his fist. 3 days? With a sick baby and no proof gathered? That's his plan, Corporal Hank said quietly after the clerk left. Strike while we're reeling. Through the night, Mercy's condition worsened. Her fever climbed despite Atz's remedies, and her breathing grew labored. Dawn brought no improvement. She needs quinine, Atza finally said, her voice heavy. The trading post at Fort Morgan might have some, but in this weather. Jonah stood at the window, watching snow sweep across the yard. The storm that had threatened all night was now howling in earnest. To ride out in this would be risking death, but to stay meant watching a baby suffer, maybe die. I'll go with you, Hanks offered, already reaching for his coat. Two can watch each other's backs. Lena touched Jonah's arm. The hearing ... we need you here to prepare, to speak for us. He looked down at her drawn face, then at the cradle where Mercy fought for each breath. The choice twisted in his chest, like a knife. For years, he'd avoided making promises, avoided caring enough about anything to risk the pain of loss. But now ... evening, after hours of debate and preparation, Jonah knelt beside the cradle. The room was quiet, except for Mercy's labored breathing and the storm's moan. Everyone else had finally drifted into exhausted sleep. Lord, he whispered, his voice rough and uncertain. I ain't talked to you much since Sarah. Didn't see the point, truth be told. He touched Mercy's tiny hand with one calloused finger. But this little one, she ain't done nothing to deserve suffering. And her mama's fought so hard already. The words came easier then, spilling out like water through a broken dam. He prayed for strength, for guidance, for protection on the trail. Most of all, he prayed for the life flickering like a candle flame in the cradle before him. I reckon you ain't obliged to listen to me after all this time, he finished. But if you're there, we sure could use some help. Standing, Jonah moved quietly through the room, gathering his gear. He paused only to scribble a note for Lena, explaining his decision. The sound of his spurs was muffled by the rag rug as he headed for the door. Hanks was already waiting outside with the horses, both animals stamping restlessly in the swirling snow. The corporal's face was grim but determined as they mounted. Up. 2 days' hard ride to Fort Morgan, Hank said, pulling his scarf up against the wind. If we push through the night. Jonah nodded, taking one last look at the warm windows of the Reverend's house. Then he turned his horse into the storm, feeling the snow sting his face like tiny needles. Behind them, they left hoof prints that filled almost as quickly as they were made. They rode into darkness and howling wind, two men gambling their lives against time and weather for the sake of a tiny girl, who'd never learn their names if they failed. Dawn broke pale and harsh across the frozen landscape. Jonah and Hanks mounted their horses, shoulders hunched against the relentless wind. The snow cut sideways, stinging their faces like tiny shards of glass. Neither man spoke much, saving their energy for the grueling ride ahead. Might make Fort Collins by nightfall, Hank shouted over the wind, squinting at the white-shrouded hills before them. If we don't lose the trail. Jonah just nodded, his thoughts fixed on little Mercy's labored breathing. Every hour on the trail was another hour the fever had to take hold. The horses plowed forward through drifts that sometimes reached their bellies, steam rising from their flanks. Despite the bitter cold. By late afternoon, the weather cleared, enough to reveal the welcome sight of the army post's stockade walls. The flag snapped sharp against the darkening sky as they rode through the gates. Their horses were spent, sides heaving from the hard push through deep snow. The post surgeon drove a hard bargain, but Jonah gladly traded his good hunting knife and a string of prime beaver pelts for the precious quinine powder and a packet of ground mustard. Mix it with warm water, the surgeon instructed. The mustard paste will help draw out the chest congestion. They bedded down in the fort's barn loft, wrapped in horse blankets that smelled of leather and hay. Sleep came quick after the brutal, Days ride, but Jonah's dreams were troubled by memories of Sarah's fever. Her face pale against their wedding quilt. The return journey proved even harder. Fresh snow had filled their tracks, and new drifts blocked familiar passes. What should have been a day's ride stretched into evening as they picked their way carefully through treacherous ground. When they finally reached the burned-out shell of the line shack, Jonah's heart clenched at the sight of smoke rising from its remains. But the smoke led them to where Atsa and Lena had made camp in the lee of the standing walls, using fallen timbers to create a makeshift shelter. "We've been keeping them warm with heated stones," Lena explained, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. She showed them how they'd wrapped smooth river rocks in cloth, heating them in the fire before tucking them near the babies, rotating them day and night. Jonah didn't waste time. He mixed the quinine powder carefully in warm water, while Atsa prepared the mustard paste for Mercy's chest. The baby felt frighteningly light in his arms as he held her, supporting her head while Lena helped her swallow the medicine. Through the long night, they took turns holding Mercy close, watching her battle the fever that had taken such fierce hold. Jonah found himself humming old hymns his mother had sung, the same ones he'd hummed to Sarah in her final hours. But this time, as false dawn began to paint the eastern sky, he felt tiny fingers grip his rough hand with surprising strength. "Her breathing's easier," Lena whispered, touching Mercy's forehead. "The fever's breaking." In the growing light, Jonah could see color returning to the baby's cheeks. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, no longer fighting for each breath. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white silence. 3 days later, frost coated the church windows as townspeople filed into the cramped wooden pews. Their breath hung in clouds beneath the rafters. Judge Harrison settled behind a makeshift desk near the pulpit, his black robes gathering dust from the rough-hewn surface. Meriwether rose first, cutting a fine figure in his eastern suit. "This hearing concerns public necessity," he declared, unrolling a map across the judge's desk. "Bluebird Spring lies precisely where the railroad requires a water station. Progress demands certain sacrifices for the greater good." He gestured toward Lena, who sat straight back beside Jonah, the twins sleeping in a basket at her feet. The current occupant's fitness to hold such a vital resource must be considered. Deputy Culver took the floor next, his badge gleaming. "That woman," he spat the word, "has no proper marriage record. Living in sin with a dead Indian scout, claiming his property through half-breed babies." His voice dripped with venom. "She's morally unfit to raise those children, let alone control water rights." Several townspeople shifted uncomfortably at his tone. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, pulled her shawl tighter and whispered something to her husband. Atsa Whitefeather stood then, her dignity filling the small church. In her weathered hands, she held a beaded belt, its intricate patterns catching the weak winter light. "This is our people's record," she explained, her voice clear and strong. "Each knot, each shell tells a story. Here," she pointed to a complex weaving, "shows Mateo and Lena's marriage day. These marks speak of hopes for children." This was Mateo's work, his promise in our way. The judge leaned forward, studying the craftsmanship. "While I respect your traditions, ma'am, United States law requires. Then perhaps this will satisfy." "Law," Corporal Hanks interrupted, stepping forward. He unfolded a creased paper, his hands trembling slightly. Mateo's field affidavit, signed and witnessed. "I was there." He cleared his throat and read. "I, Mateo Navarez, grant all rights to Bluebird Spring to my beloved wife, Lena, and our future children, should any harm befall me in service." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reverend Avery stood suddenly, his face pale but determined. "I can speak to the marriage," he said, his voice quavering at first but growing stronger. "I performed the ceremony myself. though fear kept me from recording it properly. I was a coward. He turned to face. Lena, I failed you both. But I stand now as witness. They were lawfully wed before God and man. More whispers filled the church. Sarah Collins, who'd often praised Culver's strong hand at social gatherings, now stared at him with narrowed eyes. Old Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith, spat on the floor when Culver tried to catch his gaze. The deputy's face darkened as he felt the mood of the room shift. He stepped toward the judge's desk, one hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. Your Honor, surely you won't let these savages and their sympathizers. The judge held up his hand, silencing him. I believe I've heard enough accusations, Deputy Culver. Now, regarding these documents. The judge shuffled through the papers before him, frowning at the affidavit. In the heavy silence, Jonah slowly reached into his coat and withdrew Hannah's worn leather Bible. His large fingers worked at a hidden seam along its spine. Your Honor, he said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the church. There's one more piece of evidence you should see. He extracted a folded document from the carefully sewn pocket, the paper crisp despite its hiding place. This is my original guardianship bond, filed and witnessed 3 years ago. I kept a copy safe, knowing such papers sometimes ... disappear. Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose as he compared the document to the official record book. Disappears. To be in perfect order, Mr. Braddock. Yet there's no trace of it in our files. He turned his stern gaze to Deputy Culver. Would you care to explain this discrepancy? Culver's face reddened. That paper's a forgery, he sputtered, taking a step backward. He's trying to, if I may, Your Honor. Corporal Hanks stood, his military bearing commanding attention. Last week, I witnessed Deputy Culver moving documents from the courthouse after hours. He met Mr. Merriweather behind the saloon. Hanks swallowed hard but continued. I saw money change hands, $20 in gold coin. The church erupted. In gasps and mutters, Mrs. Peterson crossed herself. Old Mr. Henderson slammed his cane against the floor. That's a lie. Culver's hand moved toward his gun. Deputy Culver. Judge Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. Remove your hand from that weapon immediately. He nodded to 2 surprised townsmen in the front pew. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Henderson, as duly appointed officers of this court, I direct you to take the deputy into custody. The baker and blacksmith moved quickly, their faces grim. Culver's gun clattered to the floor as they seized his arms. As for this hearing, the judge continued, gathering the papers before him, I find no grounds for condemnation of Bluebird Spring. The property rights are legally established through Mateo Navarez's affidavit and clearly transferred to his widow and children. He turned to Merriweather. The railroad's petition is denied. This water source will remain private property, held in trust for the Navarez twins. Merriweather's smooth facade cracked. Your Honor, the economic implications are not my concern. Judge Harrison cut him off. This court's duty is to uphold the law, not bend it for corporate interests. He smiled slightly at Lena. Mrs. Navarez, your late husband's wishes are hereby affirmed. May your children grow strong by those waters. Lena pressed her face into her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jonah gently touched her back as Atzel lifted both twins from their basket, their small faces peaceful in sleep. Court is adjourned, the judge declared. Rapping his gavel against the desk. Sunrise painted the sky in ribbons of rose and gold as wagons and riders made their way to Bluebird Spring. The water bubbled clear and strong from the rocky ground, its surface catching the morning light like scattered diamonds. Fresh snow draped the surrounding pines, but the air held a hint of coming spring. Jonah helped Lena from the wagon, then lifted each twin with gentle care. Faith and Mercy cooed in their new white dresses, sewn by Mrs. Peterson and trimmed with lace from half a dozen ladies' collections. The townsfolk gathered in a half-circle, their breath visible in the crisp air. Reverend Avery stood beside the spring, his Bible open in his hands. His voice carried across the hushed crowd. "We gathered today to celebrate new beginnings, both of life and spirit." He smiled at the twins. "These waters, like God's grace, flow freely for all who thirst." Lena stepped forward first, cradling Faith. The baby's dark eyes were wide as Avery sprinkled the spring water on her forehead. "I baptize you, Faith Hannah Navarez, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." Mercy followed, her small face peaceful as the water blessed her. "And I baptize you, Mercy Rose Navarez, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." Then, Lena handed the twins to Atsa and stepped into the shallow pool herself, her simple blue dress floating around her. "I choose this path," she said clearly, "for myself and my children." Avery baptized her as the morning sun broke fully over the ridge. Jonah moved forward last, his large frame somehow humble. "I lost my way after Hannah died," he said, his deep voice rough with emotion. "But God never lost me." He knelt in the cold water. "I returned to his grace today." As he rose, water streaming from his hair, someone started singing Amazing Grace. The hymn spread through the crowd, lifting toward the bright sky. Atsa stepped to the spring's edge, raising her arms. Her blessing came in both Ute and English, honoring the water's gift and the children's future. "May these waters nurture all who come in peace," she concluded, "and may these little ones grow strong in both body and spirit." Judge Harrison approached with papers in hand. "I've prepared a right-of-way agreement," he announced. "It guarantees public access for watering while protecting Mrs. Navarez's ownership." He smiled at Lena. "The railroad can negotiate fair terms, or find another route." The crowd broke into small groups, sharing food from baskets and passing the twins from arm to arm. Children splashed at the spring's edge while their parents talked of building a proper watering station with troughs for stock. Jonah stood beside Lena, watching Faith grip his finger with surprising strength. "Reckon we all found something here," he said softly. Lena nodded, Mercy sleeping against her shoulder. "Yes," she answered. "We found home." The spring bubbled on, constant and clear, while above it the mountain air rang with voices raised in song and celebration. The mountain spring thawed into full bloom as life settled into new rhythms. Each dawn brought the sound of hammering and sawing as Jonah worked to transform the burned blind shack into a proper home. Where once stood a simple shelter, sturdy walls rose beneath a peaked roof, with real glass windows letting in the morning light. Neighbors who had kept their distance now appeared with lumber and nails, eager to help. Old Jim McKenzie brought cedar shakes for the roof, while the Peterson boys hauled river rock for a proper chimney. Even Sheriff Wilson stopped by with a wagon of pine boards, nodding quietly to Jonah before rolling up his sleeves to work. "Ain't seen such a raising since before the war," Reverend Avery remarked one afternoon, passing up shingles from below. The house grew room by room, a snug kitchen with a proper cook stove, a bright nursery for the twins, and a sitting room with built-in shelves for books. Atsa visited 3 times each week, a knowledge flowing like the spring itself. She showed Lena which early plants made the best teas, how to dry herbs for winter, and which barks could ease teething pain. The twins thrived under their combined care, growing plump and strong. "These songs are old as the mountains," Atsa explained one afternoon, teaching Lena a lullaby while the babies dozed. "They carry our stories, our healing." Her weathered fingers moved through the air, marking the rhythm as Lena learned each verse. Corporal Hanks stayed until the worst of the building was done. The night before he left, he handed Lena the precious affidavit, now carefully sealed in oilcloth. "Keep it safe," he said. his voice gruff with emotion. Matteo would be proud of how you fought for his girls. At dawn, he rode west, seeking his own fresh start. The house neared completion as summer approached. Jonah worked late into the evenings, his hands moving steady and sure over wood that would shelter them all. One such night, while Lena sat on the new porch with the sleeping twins, he brought out something covered in a soft cloth. "Been working on this," he said quietly, unveiling a cradle carved from golden pine. 2 sparrows perched along its rim, their wings spread in eternal protection over those who would sleep below. The wood gleamed with careful polishing, smooth as silk to the touch. Lena traced the birds with gentle fingers. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jonah settled beside her, his large hands suddenly uncertain in his lap. "Been thinking," he said, slowly choosing each word with care, "about family, about how the Lord sometimes gives us second chances at joy." He met her eyes in the fading light. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd be honored to be husband to you and father to these little ones." The evening breeze stirred Lena's hair as she smiled, her heart full of quiet certainty. "We'll be ready together," she answered, softly. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, while inside, the twins slept peaceful in their new home. Spring crept into the valley like a gentle awakening. Snow melted into rivulets that fed bluebird spring and tender green. Shoots pushed through softening earth. The new house stood proud against the mountainside, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. On this particular Sunday, the kitchen buzzed with warmth and friendship. Neighbors gathered around the sturdy table, sharing bowls of fragrant stew and fresh-baked bread. Lamplight cast golden shadows on the log walls, making everyone's faces glow with contentment. In their pine cradle, Faith and Mercy cooed and reached for dancing dust motes. Their cheeks had grown round and rosy with health, their dark eyes bright with curiosity. The careful craftsmanship of Jonah's carved sparrows watched over their rest. Wind bells hung above the spring chimed their delicate song, calling Jonah and Lena to step outside. They stood together on the wide porch, watching the clear water bubble up from earth's depths, steady and pure as it had always been. "Thank you, Lord," Jonah spoke into the quiet air, his deep voice reverent, "for bringing us through the storm to this peace." Lena leaned against his solid warmth, her voice soft but sure. "This spring's music will sing our girls to sleep for years to come." Together they listened to the water's endless song, its voice, a promise of life flowing ever onward. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.